Okay. You have to announce it.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
good.
Okay.
We are recording. Welcome. This is the second in 5 educational classes on reconciling in Christ. And we are gathered here today to listen to and learn about clunky questions. And before we do that, I would like each of the team to introduce themselves and then each person here. And if you could share your pronouns, that would be great.
I'm Susanna Murphy. My pronouns are she, her.
Jean Larson, she, her.
Linda Redfern, she, her.
Lonnie Nielsen Cattell, she, her, hers.
I'm not.
Dan over there, it doesn't matter.
Oh.
Georgia Cobbs, she, her.
Nancy Mark, she, her.
Mick Hansen, he, him.
Audrey Thornton, she, her.
Thank you. And the videos that we are going to be watching today are produced and available through Reconciling in Christ nationally. And if you can see on your screen,
Maybe.
you will look at the Reconciling Works logo, and to go find these videos, you will go to the church website, and on the church website,
I'm gonna go back to the homepage.
there we have the homepage. And here is the section on reconciling in Christ education. If you click on that.
So
you
right
can-
now it goes to the sign up, but in the sign up is the web page. And when we're done here, it'll go, that logo will go back to the web page, which looks like this.
Okay, good.
And we're also recording these, and so it'll be where under this more info. So then you can go and if you go to more info, then you'll get to see, here's the one from last week.
Nice. Thank you, Nancy. Nancy Marks has been recording these and putting them on our website.
Ready?
So, do you want me to click it or?
No, you can. Working? Did you turn it on?
Oh, whoops.
That's always the question.
There we go.
So the first video is entitled, "Why can't the church just say all are welcome and leave it at that?"
Saying all are welcome is a nice sentiment, and most churches probably mean well when they use this phrase. Heck, even I'm guilty of using it.
And, they could argue, oh, no, everybody's welcome. They just have to be like us. And most of us don't even think that we're saying, you have to be just like us or else you're not welcome. But a lot of times, all are welcome is speech, is church speak for, kind of.
As a transgender bisexual guy, I've been to many churches before that have said that they're welcoming and that they've said that they love absolutely all people with no exception. But as soon as they've found out that I'm not straight, that welcome has turned into a form of cold tolerance.
So sometimes the unspoken message that can come across is, all are welcome as long as you're straight or don't talk about your partner.
And it takes an extra gesture of inclusion for people who have been abused by the church in the past and people who have been told that they weren't part of God's community.
And so as Christian communities, I think that we can do a lot better than that. And I think specifically naming groups of people who have historically been excluded from our communities is a step in the right direction.
I know when my wife and I are looking for a place to worship, the phrase all is welcome is no longer enough by itself to entice us to visit. Rather, we look for a specific invitation for LGBTQ people, which lets us know that the church has had an intentional conversation about welcoming us.
You have to say things like LGBTQ folk are welcome, or we're proud of our inclusivity, or even we hired a gay pastor, you should come check her out. Now it seems kind of hard, I know, because you think somehow you're excluding others, but it's not the case. You have to be intentional and specific about who you're welcoming.
So we fly the rainbow flag, and we have our RIC plaque posted, and we make a big deal about those things, and we welcome everybody explicitly on Sunday so that everyone knows that this community is for them.
Are you just gonna, are you stopping in between or?
I think we should, yeah. Are there any questions, or does anyone want to have some more discussion about that? Mhm.
Does that also include people of color?
That is definitely what the church wide is encouraging and what Reconciling in Christ is encouraging at this point. It's just, it's so important that we make that explicit welcome. Yeah.
And we have in our welcome statement, our draft welcome statement that we're going to talk about next week. So we've included a broad range, but specifically of people of color and others who've been marginalized.
Because that was going to be my next question. Are we saying that? So it sounds like we're going to change our welcome statement, which is great, because that would be including those things.
Okay, we're not changing any of the existing statements.
We're adding to it.
Well, it's a separate statement. We've got a mission statement and a vision statement, and now we're going to have a welcome statement.
Oh,
There you go.
Okay,
So it's not replacing anything that the church has worked on before.
Okay, thank you.
got it. Well, I also think of it as folks, people with disabilities coming, we've
Right.
talked about
Mm,
inclusion
yep.
for a long, long time.
Yep.
And so, I mean, inclusive is inclusive, not just this.
And I love what they said at the beginning. Sometimes all our welcome means as long as you look like us,
Mhm.
or as long as you are like us. Nadia Bolz-Weber talks about that in her book Pastrix, about the people that, so she has tattoos head to toe, and she talks about the people that made her grumpy that showed up at church as being the people in khakis driving a minivan because they weren't like her.
Yeah. Yeah. And then she had to, they look like my parents, but they're welcome too.
Yes, she had to come to, we had to come to Jesus's kind of welcome.
So would it be something that we'd be as bold to have the rainbow flag or the RIC statement or the thing out there so people would see that as well? Would
We
that be something-
definitely are looking at visuals as part of the plan, and maybe talking to the team that has worked on all of the aesthetics of the church, so that we're sure it's part of an incorporated, inclusive thing. Yeah, that's definitely part of the conversation.
One of my colleagues, that great hymn, All Are Welcome.
We sang it this morning, didn't we?
No.
Oh,
No.
we sang, it did say all are welcome in one of the hymns
Yeah,
today.
yeah. A pastor said, I'm not going to sing this. I mean, and he got to choose all the hymns for the congregation. Not every congregation works that way. But he says, we're not singing this until it's true.
Oh.
And I thought that was a pretty powerful statement because I love that hymn. I love to sing it. But he says it's not true, so we shouldn't be singing it.
Okay, so the next Clunky Question video is entitled LGBTQIA. Why do you need to lay up?
Oops. Is it?
No, not that one.
PowerPoint, go back to your PowerPoint.
Okay. Which one? This one is the one I had next, I think.
This is the all are welcome.
That's the one we just watched.
This is the L, yeah.
Oh, this one.
We
Sorry.
want the
That's
Okay.
LGBTQ.
Okay.
There you go. That's it.
Wasn't far enough. Oh, this we got it. No.
This LGBTQ acronym that people throw around, it can be really confusing.
It's a group, and however the group chooses to identify, I think the most important thing is that that choice is respected by people outside of the group.
The labels are an attempt to help everyone feel like that they're seen, that they're welcomed, that we all have an actual place.
I think that by recognizing the particularity of my transness helps me to connect with other people with my specific struggle or joys or journey, but also recognizing that I'm a part of a larger queer community helps us to share common stories about coming out and the struggles in the workplace or the joys that we have in being a beautiful, diverse creation.
There's to be a name to something for it to be recognized, and you know, you can stand up and be counted amongst your fellow people in that group. We also have to consider the intersections of race and class and religion, nationality, and all these other different identity factors that go into how people express themselves within these different categories.
Amongst friends, I always like to help people in terms of translating something that doesn't make sense for a group that you're not a part of. I think that people in the United States are more familiar with black and white relations, so if you don't know why LGBTQIA feel like they need to label themselves, then think about the way that black people in the United States have quote-unquote labeled themselves. We have had many names said to us that we didn't necessarily accept, but once we were able to have a voice for ourselves, we asked. So African American became the term, and it changes. It's okay for things to change.
Even those of us that would identify as being a part of the LGBTQIA community, we often sometimes don't understand its fullness. And it's only through being in a relationship with one another that I think we're able to move towards that space where we're able to see, oh, this is why it's important to have a defined label or a defined expression that allows us to move in a way that gives us voice and presence in our society.
We have a big, beautiful God who has created all of this diversity. What better way to worship that God but to celebrate that diversity and to look for it?
Okay. Any further discussion on that video?
At the very end, the end screen only said LGBT.
Oh. Q plus.
Yeah, IA, 2S. It's good that we're exploring that it's just so much more rich and diverse than maybe we thought.
And it's nice that she said it's always changing, just like African American may not even be appropriate. Some people prefer Black. And
Yes.
Native American may not be appropriate. Some people prefer their specific tribe. You know, some people prefer Indigenous. So it's nice. And queer is tough for me to say because I grew up being derogatory. This comment. So I think it's good that they said just ask because I don't want to offend people, but I also want to recognize what they want to be called too, or what we all should be called. You know, we call white people, white privileged people, you know, which a lot of us are. So anyway, it's just interesting. Asking is important. And that's even what I try to share with my students, that if you don't know, ask.
I think it's important that we talk about that flexibility with things just always changing. And we know that best practices are always changing. Like I shared with the group earlier on when we were talking about pronouns, the best practice used to say that when you introduce your pronouns, you would say, I prefer these pronouns, and now that's not the best practice. You say, I use these pronouns, because if you say I prefer, that, hinders on it being a choice when it's not a choice. This is my identity. This is what I use. And so things are constantly changing. And so it's important to know and be open-minded and just humble, and always be curious and asking those questions and open to learning new things. Yeah.
I like the way you phrase that, Lonnie. Always be curious. I think that's so important for us as humans, to be curious about others and just things in general. Don't close your mind. Keep an open mind, be curious about things, and you learn and grow and change. And it's okay to change. It's okay to change your mind. It's okay to change your views. It's okay. You don't have to stick with something just because that's the way you've always done it.
Yeah.
And curious about what God wants for us or from us. Because that grows too.
I was talking to a nice liberal friend of mine who just rolled his eyes at this. He says, oh, come on, do we have to use all those letters? It's a mouthful all the time. And it is. I mean, it doesn't sort of flow off the tongue very easily. And he's a liberal guy, and I'm thinking, okay, what can I say that might really connect? And it occurred to me to say, well, it's sort of like saying all Indians do da-da-da-da, or all Indians are alike. And most Indian people I know like to be referred to from their tribe. So, and he's done some work with Indian people. He gets that. And then I think he started understanding this a little bit better.
In our world here, it used to be that you were Swedish Lutheran or German Lutheran. Yeah, I mean, that was sort of important. I'm glad it's not as necessary to separate now. But now what we're working toward is including by naming and calling out.
Yeah, as opposed to saying one large group. I mean, in the past, it used to be the word, oh, homosexual, which really isn't the definition.
Yeah, and it
That's
skips a
not-
ton of people.
Yep. I think it's good to recognize that in the church, we do both. I mean, we do want to name people and call them what they want to be named. And we do want to have this really diverse community, the LGBTQIA plus community, acknowledged for their diversity. They're not all the same. But in the end, we also want to affirm we are united in Christ. So I see this as a both and.
Exactly.
What are we learning next?
Okay, the next video is called, Is This a Gay Church Now?
Well, that's actually a question we had, isn't it?
Yes.
Part of what the church is the fearfully strange and wonderful body of Christ.
Now, not every congregation is going to be for every person. I understand that. That's okay. But we need to be a church that's able to hold more types of people.
The church is supposed to be somewhere where people of all sexual orientations and gender identities and races and ethnicities and languages and socioeconomic backgrounds can all come together and be united in the name of Christ.
And I hope it's an addicted church, and a divorced church, and a church that's very confident and full of itself, and a church where people have really good educations and no education and homeless.
It's a church for babies who are learning to walk and old people who need some help getting around. It's a church for huge families and for single people. It's a church where your contributions and bringing yourself to the community makes it better. It's not a church where you have to fit into what someone else says church is.
See, this is the idea, that the church becomes a place for all people.
God is alive and active and doing really cool things all around the world through churches and other places of worship. Just because one of these places may have an LGBTQ pastor doesn't suddenly change their identity. It's a church for all who hunger for deeper meaning in their lives, for all who yearn for connection and community, and for all who seek the promises of God's love and forgiveness and grace in their lives.
Okay, any other questions, discussion?
I think that was a pretty solid answer to that question. We're not a gay church. We're a church that includes all of us. And us has grown bigger.
I like the way the one person was saying, those who are just learning to walk and those who are older and needs help to walk. I'm thinking, I think we have those folks in our church. And it's really nice. So, yeah.
And I love the woman who said, I hope it's a divorced church and a married church and a
addicted church.
Yes.
I like that.
Yes.
We just need to, the tent needs to include everyone.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, the next video is, why do you base your relationship solely on sex?
Why do you base your relationship solely on sex?
I don't. I base my relationships on trust and communication.
People have been reducing the gay community to just sex for centuries. They're reducing an entire population of the LGBTQ community to just one aspect of the human experience, misses out on both the individual nature of each of us and the complex variety that exists within our community.
I guess there's this idea that if I'm saying I love men, that means that all my entire thought process is about the male physique, the male physicality, the male genitalia. And it's not fair, it's not true.
I think part of the mainstream ethos has been to maintain ways of how we perceive individual groups. In the gay community, I think that there's been different ways that fear has been induced, and I think that historically, as we've navigated through society, there's been a very specific way of looking at what are the things that are different, or what are the things that are not moral, as a way not to embrace, but to subjugate people as being bad.
By saying that gay people are just about sex is like saying the straight people are just about money. You're reducing us to just one element of our life.
So I identify as queer, but I do not base my relationships solely on sex, having sex, or my sexuality. I don't allow my sexual identity to completely subsume my life. I'm a grad school student, I'm a business owner, I am a daughter and a sister, I'm a friend, I'm so many other things besides my sexuality.
But for other people in this identity, trans people, intersex people, their relationship or their identity in this sense isn't based on sex. Now that doesn't mean that you can't be, intersexed and bisexual or trans and asexual or all of those things. Sex is only one part of who we are as people. And I also think that it's an important part. You shouldn't just deny that or whatever. That's, you know, part of your God-given identity.
It's an identity, but it is not an entire person.
Teaching young people that that sexuality is a gift, that that extension of our physical being, that ability to become so close to another, is sacred.
Okay, open it up for any questions, comments, discussion.
Just like we shouldn't put one characteristic on anybody. I mean, do they say that that's all I'm about is making money from a white person or whatever? You know, there are so many facets of everybody's personality that's nice that it's just, we need to recognize the whole person, not just who you happen to be in intimate relationship with. So that was really nice that they brought that up, because maybe some people do think about that, and that's so sad, you know. Think of the whole person, the whole creation, which is nice.
And it's tricky when you're just learning, when it's new, when it's a new exposure and it's a new idea to be welcoming in that way. It's tricky, and there's no denying that. That's why these clunky questions are being addressed. We need to have compassion for ourselves and for one another in exploring these questions in our heart and in our prayers so that we can be better, so that we can do better. And it can take a minute. But I love it that we have the resource of listening to people who have had that experience in their life and who've really explored it deeply. It's tricky to be sure, but not unnavigable.
Thanks, Susanna, because, you know, sex has a power of focusing our attention, you know, and sometimes my mind goes there, I thought, I don't want to go there, but I go there, right? And so the compassion for yourself, I mean, we're human beings, we tend to get all excited about this stuff. I remember still, and I've told this story before, in the 2009 Montana Synod Assembly, when we were debating the big resolutions, one son of a pastor got up and said, okay, you know, we all get sort of stuck trying to imagine what gay sex is like, but okay, so I sort of get stuck imagining what sex between my parents was like, and it just freaks me out, and the whole assembly just burst into laughter, and we were just crying. It was so funny because we were all then trying to imagine that. Anyway, I think we need to be very compassionate with ourselves when it comes to this. So thank you.
Okay,
You have one more?
we have one more video, and the title of that is I Don't Get Trans.
So people ask that clunky question, I don't get transgender.
That's okay. I really don't get it either. But I also can't explain to you how a rainbow works. I know that our bodies are unique and full of complex possibilities and differences.
Being trans means that there's this magic, I guess, about crossing the borders of that binary.
As a self-identified trans person for a long time, I didn't understand that people didn't have the same kind of feelings that I did. You know, there's lots of things that we don't get, but that doesn't mean that they're not really important to the people who embrace that identity.
People in the trans community notice a lot of those inherent value differences, power differences between being perceived as male and being perceived as female, and find a lot to celebrate in the gender that they feel they are.
A transgender identity is a gender identity. It has nothing to do with sexuality. So a transgender person is someone who was born with an identity that they don't agree with. They were born with a body that doesn't reflect the identity they feel and know for themselves inside. This doesn't mean the same thing as cross-dressing, and the term tranny is not appropriate. So learning these kinds of things is very important.
I think about this question and I say, I don't get trans people has created the kinds of violence that is being perpetuated against our trans sisters of color who are dying because someone does not get them, are dying because there is this fear of what it means for someone who is perceived in a particular gender to express themselves in a different way. What does it mean for someone to come into being who they are in a world that has told them that they should not exist?
Find a trans person and talk with them about what it's been like for them, about what they've gained and what they've lost, about the way that they feel moving in the world, not about what surgeries they've had. That's just inappropriate.
One person can hear a song one time and know how to play it perfectly, and another person can just know the right way to throw a football arc. In the same way that someone knows whether their body is left-handed or right-handed, I know that I am male, even though I was assigned female at birth. I know that I am trans, and I'm grateful for this life, and I'm grateful for the chance to live authentically.
Okay, any questions or discussion?
Yes. Where did we get the term cis?
Never heard of it.
Really, that's pretty common.
Yeah, so cis, spelled C-I-S, so cisgender. So the term cis actually is Latin, I believe, for meaning aligned.
Oh,
So meaning your gender identity, which is up here, and your sex assigned at birth are aligned, meaning you are
Okay.
cisgender. If you are transgender, trans meaning is that prefix for across, means that your gender identity and your sex assigned at birth does not align.
got it. My daughter tried to explain this to me years ago and it just didn't compute for a long, long time. But thank you for explaining because I wasn't sure where we got cis from.
Yes. Yeah, see, and you'll hear a lot of folks will say like I'm a straight, cisgender, white, female. That explains things, that kind of goes down the line for their identities. And you get to share what you want to share. But yeah, that's what, you'll hear that a lot.
So I wondered, why do sometimes there's a pronoun they in there? Can somebody explain that?
Yeah, so the gender binary, meaning male or female, there's the two. When folks use they them pronouns, it means that they're non-binary, meaning that they don't fit into either of those.
Okay.
They don't agree, that's not a part of their culture. For example, some folks will use two-spirit as a gender pronoun for some indigenous cultures because the gender binary doesn't feel true to them. And so based on their tribe, they have many different names, but they'll use two-spirit as a gender pronoun, or they, them, theirs.
But also a two-spirit person could use she, because I know a person who has done that.
Yeah, and it's fluid, right?
Mhm.
Gender is fluid. It can change, and that's why it's important to ask and be curious and let the person introduce themselves. That's one of our best practices in groups, is to introduce our pronouns every group, because gender is fluid and it might have changed.
And because when I have called that person, I thought that person was male when I first met that person. And that person was so forgiving. Georgia, no, I'm a two-spirit and I prefer the pronoun she. Okay, I'm so sorry. But that person was just so forgiving because I just didn't know, or I forgot, or whatever.
And it's dependent on tribe. It's very different for every tribe.
Yeah, it's just very nice. That person was also educating me
Yeah.
in a very nice, warm, caring way too.
Right.
So,
I know my daughter and her boyfriend identify as gender fluid. So, and that they fit perfectly together because they both are like that. So, took a long time for me to learn all this stuff. It's not something that you can just understand immediately.
and I
At
really,
least I couldn't.
I'm sorry. And what was the last statement?
At least I couldn't anyway.
Well, and I
Some people
think-
could be quicker. I'm not that quick.
I think, reading about it or, being a theoretician or whatever, it can be all academic. But until you have a personal relationship and can really get to know someone, it makes so much more sense then. Like I was just sharing about that one person. And I'm so thankful that I had that relationship with her so I can understand it. And also just accept, it's an acceptance, I believe, and loving and caring. And that person could not be more loving and caring. So it's just awesome. But, to have the head knowledge is one thing, but then to have that personal relationship, I think helps you understand. Also have that compassion and empathy and just love that God wants us to have for everyone.
And it sounds like, Audrey, you had to be patient with yourself.
Yes.
While you dialed it in, while you readjusted your focus and figured it out. And I too have had to be patient with me. And it's been a good practice for me. I would be patient. I remind myself I would be patient with anyone else if they were messing this up. And I need to be patient while I get this figured out. In a middle school classroom, it can be a tricky place to hold both of those things, that it's tricky and we need to respect each other. Sometimes that's not their best strength.
There's a children's literature book. I know I've shared this with you before. It's called George, but now it's been changed to Melissa. And it's written for the 4th grader. And it's about a young person who was born with male genitalia, but really wanted to be a girl all of her life. But how she came out to her family is just a beautiful story. And it's written, like I said, for a 4th or 5th grader. And the LGBTQIA group got miffed because it was called George when George didn't want to be George. So now it's called Melissa. So it's just a really beautiful story. So I bring that book out to my students to talk about inclusivity, when we want to reach the above learners, below learners, where we have to be inclusive with all walks of life and not say you guys, because we're not all guys. And so I bring out that story as well. One of my students borrowed it and loved the book, and now she has questions. I said, well, let's talk. So I think it's a beautiful story. It's been banned in some places.
A lot of us have to just use y'all.
Y'all.
And I do, because it works for me.
Yep.
Yeah, you
The
all
South was way ahead.
Well, and I find myself using people's names more than ever, so
right.
I just stop using pronouns as much as possible. Refer to people by their names, because you can never mess up that way.
Oh.
And they can be appropriate.
Oh,
They
yeah.
is a single pronoun, is against my whole English, my high school English, but they can be an appropriate term to use.
Yeah,
But
until you know their pronouns.
right. And I tell my students, scholars, mathematicians, you don't have to say you guys, whatever. So it's just, we have to be creative. And also ask, what do they want to be called?
Well, yeah, I mean, preschool, you say friends, hi friends. So yeah, there are many different ways to be inclusive.
And I think lately, well, probably in the past years, several years, there have been a lot of, I have a coworker whose child is trans, so there's a name change, and many times it's right around middle school. And my, a relative, same thing, and many people say, well, do you think that's just a phase? Is this just maybe not real, and maybe it's just a trend because they hear and learn all this stuff in school? And I'm like, I don't think so. I think maybe it's the time, our time, that people feel good enough to be able to express that.
Safe.
Safe enough, exactly, because there's a huge incidence of suicide among people who are trans.
And also, some children are born with both genitalia at birth, and at birth, the doctor might make a decision which one to remove. And then when the hormones kick in, it's the other hormone that kicks in.
Yeah.
And that can be
And that's a very high percent, 10%.
There is around 13 different types of intersex. And so knowing, I mean, I co-facilitate the trans, intersex, and non-binary group at the center. And we were going through all the different types of intersex and what that means, what challenges that can mean for folks. And it's different for every person. And it's hard based on whether the parents decide or the doctors decide, or they decide to not do anything until the child is in middle school to determine what they want, what they want to do. And so it's, yeah.
And it's a whole new world because we never used to talk about any of this. And I think that's another reason to be very compassionate with ourselves. Like, whoa. I mean, I'm learning so much, but I didn't start here. Never dreamt that much of this was real. So, I think especially in the church, we got to say, okay, we're learning, we're doing our best to welcome as Christ welcomes. And, that refers to everybody. So
that actually reminds me, Jean, when you are having conversations with folks and they correct you or they offer new information, I think it's great to have that mentality of, oh, thank you, I'm still learning about all this, and I'm trying my best. And when we say thank you, I'm still learning, instead of, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean, we make it, it's easier for them we just acknowledge their feedback, and it's easier to move on, versus when we're sorry, we become defensive and can make it a bigger deal than it needs to be. So it's actually if we have that mentality, it's easier for everyone.
Mm,
involved.
thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, that's helpful.
Exactly. And I go back to what we were taught in our first reconciling in Christ education. It's the basics. We're taught to love God, we're taught to love our neighbor, and it's not our place to judge. Well, I think that concludes our second session, unless
Thank you.
there's any more comments or questions, people have. Okay, well, thank you. Next week, the topic is on our
Welcome
welcome
statement.
statement. Yes.